Morning. How's everybody doing? Those three steps were probably it was the most difficult three steps to take. Today is one of I think probably one of the most personal talks that I've given in a long time, but I want to begin this talk with a minute of silence, actually. Um, Many of us in this area know that there was a shooting in the Chabad community, in the Chabad synagogue, just a couple of days ago. And there was one person who was killed, number who were injured in a place of worship, not unlike Deer Park. And then there was a car that ran into a group of Muslims before that, and then a bombing, a series of bombings in Sri Lanka, the beautiful island of Sri Lanka, that wounded and killed a number of Christians and Catholics, and not even mentioning the massacre in Christchurch. And much has been said, much has been written, and there will continue to be said and to be written. But I don't want to say anything. I think words can't respond to these situations. What I'd like to do is to invite everyone to sit in silence for a minute, to just sit in silence and to feel what we're feeling, to understand what we're understanding. And then we'll begin with 3 sounds of the bell. So dear family, in Buddhism there's a beautiful phrase, to let ourselves be permeated with the fragrance of precepts, the fragrance of mindfulness trainings, the fragrance of concentration, and the fragrance of insight. I've been thinking of this quite often as I walk around Deer Park these days, because we're in the springtime and we have the jasmine coming out, the honeysuckle, many different kinds of flowers are coming out at this time, and the fragrance is floating on the breeze. It's a very beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to invite the energy of mindfulness, of concentration, of insight, to permeate our lives. And then I always remember Theak Tan, who was the first abbot of Deer Park, who gave me a strong teaching one time and said, don't let the fragrance of your practice become the stink of Zen. And it's a good thing to contemplate on. Do I stink of Zen? Do I stink of the practice? Or is it a fragrance that permeates my life, that permeates my consciousness? I remember at one time I was walking slowly around a path in Plum Village, and there was a car coming by, and Theak Tan was the passenger in the car. Maybe they went to the doctor or something, and they were coming back, and the car pulled up, and the window wound down, and Theak Tan he saw me walking slowly and said, "So what's wrong? What's wrong?" If we're only practicing in inverted commas, when something is wrong or it's difficult, that's the stink of Zen. How can we invite this beautiful energy of presence to pervade every moment of our life? That every moment of our life is an opportunity to wake up. The easy, beautiful ones and the difficult, painful ones. For me, I think the greatest invitation of a practitioner is to be real, no matter what. Whether it's easy, whether it's difficult, but to choose to show up. Our practice is not a practice of escaping, but it's a practice of developing the capacity to show up, to be one with our experience, to not hide away anymore. I often think to myself what I would take to a desert island if I was banished to a desert island. I found this photo, and I think all of us would like to be shipwrecked on that island, right? Is anyone here doesn't want to be on that island? I'll take your place. Like, who wouldn't want to spend a couple of months there? So if I was sent, or I ended up marooned on that desert island in that horrible hell realm that we're all looking at the moment, I asked myself, what would I take to the desert island that would encapsulate the entirety of the Buddha's teaching? And I realized more and more that there are two things I would want to take to the desert island. The first is the book, The Sun, My Heart. Everybody knows I'm obsessed with Tay's book, The Sun, My Heart. That book has the seeds of all of the deep and profound teachings that our teacher offered us over so many decades. They're all in that book in seed form. He said it's a love letter from a teacher to his students. That's what he says in that book. And then I treasure that book so much. And if I can't take the book, if I have a basic economy ticket to the desert island and I'm not allowed to have any luggage, I would tear out the introduction. And I would keep the introduction, because the introduction is, I would say it's one of the most powerful transmissions from our teacher to each one of us, inviting us to see wisdom in our life, in our life as a flowing stream and not a statue in a museum, not something that was discovered just 2,500 years ago and is preserved there for all time, but something that, as Tay says in that introduction, each of us, our responsibility is to discover that in our own life, not in somebody else's life, in our own life, right where we are. So I really invite you, please, if you love our teacher, and I think all of us do, please at least put aside 15 minutes to read that introduction to The Sun, My Heart. That is Tay offering us something incredibly precious. For me, that's all I need, that one thing. It has everything there. And then the second thing I would take, if I have a little bit more luggage, is what I call my Desert Island Sutra, which is the discourse on the 8 realizations of great beings, which funnily enough we're going to be speaking about today. It's an interesting coincidence. The 8 Realization Sutra presents the entirety of Buddhism, the entire path of Buddhism, in an easy to apply seed form And it's a meditation manual. We need to remember that in the very first lines of the Eight Realizations Sutra, it's said that for all disciples, all students of awakening, we should recite and we should meditate upon these eight realizations. So basically, this sutra presents the Buddha's insight and then says, if you want to have this insight yourself, this is how to practice. We're then invited to walk through these doors of realizations. It's not a theoretical text. It's an invitation. I see it as the Buddha's love letter. Just like the Sun My Heart introduction is Tay's love letter to each one of us. This is the Buddha's love letter. This is the Buddha saying, you know what? You can do it too. And here's how. It's deceptively simple. There's so much in this sutra that we can unpack it for decades and decades and decades. It's one of the most precious gems in Buddhism, and it's often overlooked. So please remember that while it can seem that there's a lot of different ideas presented, this is a meditation manual. So it might be that we're contemplating different things in our life, or we're going through different things in our life. We will see ourselves reflected here in one aspect of the realizations, and that's where we need to enter. If something doesn't feel right for us at this point in time, then that's okay. We just stick with what's going on in our life, what realization is coming up in our life, because that's where everything will unfold from. As I shared last time, the Buddhist practice has many different capacities, and one of the qualities of Buddhist practice is that it leads onwards. That you start with one thing and it will develop and develop and develop. So start where we are. So in this sutra, we're today looking at what I call the core realizations, the core ideas, or the core Dharma doors that are presented in the fifth realization. So here one of the core insights is that ignorance is the cause of what's called the endless round of over and over again, this round of suffering in its many forms that we experience. Ignorance is the cause. Ignorance, avidya, in Pali, and it means no light. There's no light. We're kind of walking in darkness. We're unable to see. It's the same in Chinese as well. Wu Ming, or Vo Min in Vietnamese, no light. We cannot see things clearly. We're running after things that we think will bring us happiness, or bring us whatever we think we need. And this is really the core of samsara, this running. And we explored this, and we're invited into this understanding when we explored the nature of our searching mind, the nature of desire, a few realizations ago, to look and see how we get pulled out of ourselves in so many ways. The endless round of running after things that we think will bring us happiness. Pema Chodron tells a lovely story that I heard about 20 years ago, and she shares about there are all of these moths gathered around a candle flame, and one after another, the moths are so attracted to the candle flame, and they fly into the candle flame, and there's this old moth who says, "Don't do it. Don't do it." So the Buddha is someone who's saying, don't do it. You know what I mean? You've done it so many times before. Why is this time going to be different? You're not the exception. We also learn in this fifth realization about bodhisattvas. We discover what a bodhisattva is. A bodhisattva is someone who is embarked on the path of opening their heart, of developing this capacity of compassion, of wanting to be of service to all beings. And then really makes the vow throughout all time and space to be there for everybody, including ourselves. It's another important word in this realization, which is remember. And we know that mindfulness can also be translated, sati can also be translated as remembering, of recalling, of coming back together, being reunited, um, bringing all the different parts of ourselves together. So mindfulness, right mindfulness, full awareness is another insight in this realization. The real core of this realization is if we consider ourselves a practitioner, if we consider ourselves a bodhisattva, we consider ourselves someone who wants to be of service, then we need to be a little bit humble, need to be willing to listen and learn from others. There's always a tendency to think that we know everything. We know everything perfectly, especially we know ourselves perfectly. I've often said that I feel that meditation is learning to open a listening space. And I shared about that in terms of a listening space within and a listening space to our lives. And we all nod our heads and we say, yes, that's beautiful. But what it means is what we were sharing before, opening up this space of being fully present, of not having these knee-jerk reactions, of not being defensive, but really showing up. It's often said if somebody corrects us, we should thank them. A couple of days ago, one of my brothers offered me a very strong teaching. And then it was very interesting as I sat there. I noticed in myself, like, oh, this is right, this is wrong, no. And then I thought to myself, you know what? If that person offers me correction, I should thank them. Because I have a chance to see myself more clearly. And how lucky I am that that brother thinks that I have enough capacity to listen to him, to be able to receive that correction. And that is one of the most valuable things that we can receive on the path. If somebody offers us guidance, we should thank them, even if we think it's completely wrong, or if we think it's 99.9% right. We should thank them. And this is the part that's really difficult for us. I know I might be the only. Is it easy for anyone? Like, okay, all right, I'm not the only one here. We're sure we know everything already, or we just offer a bit more explanation, and then everyone will come to our view. But how is it to actually consider on a deep level, you know what, maybe other people know better than we do. Maybe other people see us more clearly than we do. We talk in our community about Sangha I. And in that experience, I said, you know what? This is really the manifestation of Sangha I. I really need to receive this. I need to look into this. And this is also an invitation in this, to always be willing to learn, to always be willing to let go of what we think we know. Even insights, we think this is the highest, most complete insight. To be willing to let go of that and to start again. It's one of the most challenging things because we have this linear idea of realization, of practice. Okay, realization 1, done. Realization 2, done. Doesn't work like that. The path is a spiral path, and we keep coming back to the lessons that we need to learn. Our teacher has asked us to ask in every second of our day, are we sure? Am I sure? Am I sure that I really understand this person, this situation clearly? And if I'm sure, which most of us, if we're really truthful to ourselves, really honest in that deep, silent place in our heart, we actually do feel sure. We're pretty sure of our perceptions. Yeah? And then taste it. If we're sure, ask again. Am I sure? There was a great TV show back in the 90s. I'm a 90s person. I have to admit it now. I'm just a 90s person. There was a great TV show called The X-Files. Does anyone know The X-Files? Yeah. I used to work shift work in the early 90s, and this is one of the shows that was on at very odd times. And in that they had a slogan, question everything. Right? So I think the thing we most need to question is our own ideas. Are we really sure? Do I really understand myself? Real fruit of insight is the understanding that we always have more to learn. We'll always have more to grow. And in our own order of into being trainings, it says that very clearly, those trainings that our teacher has offered us. Ready to learn throughout our lives. And this learning here is not only book knowledge, book learning. That's too easy. That's somebody else's knowledge. That's somebody else's insight. This is insight in a museum. And at most, it can only be a finger pointing the way. In fact, the word for Dharma teacher in Korean, Jido Bepsa, or in Vietnamese, I think it's Jidao Phapsu. The teacher, the he or she who points the way. And it's the same way with book knowledge or whatever. We can read the map as many times as we want. Or nowadays, I don't think people read the maps, they go on Google Maps. You can look at Google Maps for as long as you want, but until you actually put down the phone and take a few steps, you're not on the journey, you're having somebody else's experience. So not only book knowledge here, but in terms of the practice of meditation, it's being willing to have that attitude of discovery with even the simplest things, the things we think we already know. Taya shared in the commentary to the 8 realizations of great beings that narrow-mindedness is one of the most difficult traits, the difficult roots to transform. This attitude of narrow-mindedness, of I know it already, or yeah, you don't understand me. You haven't really understood me yet. This kind of attitude. And that through developing concentration and understanding, developing a mind that's able to really be steadfast with our experience, and then also opening our heart to listen and to learn with others, to be able and to be willing to be accountable to others, then this helps to transform what I like to call the Holy Trinity of the I, me, and my. Why don't we have a sound of the bell? Another thing that's very clear in this particular realization, the 5th realization, is skillful means, or upaya. Using skillful means to help to relieve the suffering of ourselves and others. Not the same size doesn't fit everybody. It doesn't fit all situations. Being willing to, as Tay has shared with us, experiment, practice intelligently, to really understand the situation of ourselves and the other person. How do I meet this situation without the stink of Zen, but with the fragrance of the practice? The Buddha was such a skillful teacher. And again, we see the Buddha didn't just spoon-feed people insight so that they could recite it later, but rather he put people on the path to understand something deeply within themselves. And this is the same spirit that's in this sutra, very strongly. There's one story which will become relevant a little later, of a woman called Kisagotami. And Kisagotami came, I like to see her running to the Buddha, and she had her dead child in her arms. So she came to the Buddha and she was distraught, absolutely just sobbing and distraught. And she'd heard that the Buddha was a miracle worker, and said to the Buddha, please, this is the only thing I have left. Please bring my son back to life. Can you do that for me? And then the Buddha said, sure. Now, did the Buddha tell a lie or not? If we think with our narrow mind, well, the Buddha may not have been completely truthful there. However, then the Buddha said to Kisagotami, yes, sure, I can help you. what I need in order to do this miracle is for you to go to a house and to find a house that has some sesame seed. And she said, that's very easy, I'll do that right away. And the Buddha said, but it needs to be from a house that's never known death. And so Kisha Gotami said, that's going to be so easy. So she went away with a lot of hope in her heart and knocked on the first door, the first house. Have you got these sesame seeds? Sure, sure. And the woman in the house went in to get some sesame seed. And then Kisha Gotami remembered to ask, has anyone ever died in your family? And the woman said, well, of course. Kisha Gotami said, oh, you can't help me then. And then she went from house to house like this, throughout the whole village. And then as she went through this experience, she did not need the Buddha to give her a discourse on impermanence, on death, on suffering. But through being in contact with the reality of life, of everybody sharing, yes, this is our experience too. Something deep was awoken within her. And she was able to see the nature of the reality in that moment. So helping people have the insight themselves. This is very, very hard. Because sometimes we see somebody in suffering. Sometimes we see somebody having a lot of difficulties. And our job as a friend in the path is to point the way, to be a supportive presence for that person to make the journey that they need to make, which may not be the journey that we think they need to make. This is very humbling. It's important that we don't lay our trip on others. For me, I've seen that one of the big learnings that I've had, and I'm still having, is not to try to create others or the Sangha in my own image. We're also asked in this realization, along with skillful means, to be willing to teach. And this is not teaching from a position of sitting up high and talking down, but this is the kind of teaching where we have transformation in our heart. People can touch that transformation. It's not just words, but it's something really deep. And then we're asked to bring all to the realm of great joy, sukhavati, or nirvana maybe, or liberation. So is that a place? Is nirvana a place? I know it's a band from the 90s, but is it a place? Where? Where is it exactly? Where's Sukhavati? Where's the land of great joy? Is it in the west, in the east? Is it up there? Is it down there? I mean, if we're in Australia, then up there is actually down there. You know what I mean? Like where I grew up saying that, heaven and all these things are in the sky. But if I came to you here and I said the sky is this way, you all think I'm even more insane than you already think, right? So where are these things? Why do we try to locate the ultimate in the relative dimension? Why do we try to locate that which is beyond concepts in the dimensions of time and space? Speaking of great joy, then my teacher said to me one time, you know what, Brother Phap, stop all of you running around looking for small comforts and look for the great comfort, the great joy. And it's so interesting to contemplate that, how often we just want a little bit of relief, a little bit of understanding, all of these things, all the natural kind of human emotions. But there's also the great joy, the great comfort. Where do we focus our attention? Let's not get lost in the small comforts. So here's the fifth realization in its entirety. And we've been using 3 translations. We've been using our teacher's translation. We've been using Master Xingyun's translation, who's one of the great Taiwanese Buddhist masters. And then a translation from the Zhongtai Buddhist Institute. So in summary, the whole theme of this realization is deep listening and wide learning. So in Tay's translation, we see the fifth realization is the awareness. That ignorance is the cause of the endless round of birth and death. Bodhisattvas always listen to and learn from others so that their understanding and skillful means can develop, and so they can teach living beings and bring them great joy. Master Xingyun's translation is, realize that ignorance gives rise to the cycle of birth and death. The Bodhisattva studies widely, listens carefully, and thinks often in order to increase their wisdom and develop their talents in speaking so that they are fit to teach and transform others and to show them the greatest joy. The Zhongtai Buddhist Institute, ignorance leads to birth and death. Bodhisattvas are always mindful to study and learn extensively to increase their wisdom and perfect their eloquence so they can teach and enlighten all beings and impart great joy to all. This realization is what I like to call a transition point in the sutra. The first 4 realizations or subjects for meditation, please remember that when we share here about it's the awareness. It's not something that we need to try to struggle, but when that awareness arises, then the fruit of that is when the awareness that ignorance of not seeing things clearly is something that just rises up from within us. We're like, you know what? All of my life I have not understood myself clearly. When that manifests, then what happens? We develop this sense of humility. We're like, you know what? Please teach me. Please help me to grow. This is the fruit. So we see the awareness that's there, and when that awareness arises, then the fruit that manifests is that we are somebody who is grateful and willing to listen to and learn from and with others so that we can always grow and always develop. The first 4 realizations or subjects for meditation are about our own liberation, about our own transformation, if we analyze the text, or the so-called what's called sometimes the Hinayana, or small vehicle path. The last 4 realizations in this sutra are about the bodhisattva path of bringing healing to the world. This is not only the world outside, this is also the world inside. Remember, we're transcending, as we spoke about last time, this idea of pairs of opposites. So this vehicle of being a cause of transformation is called the Mahayana, or the Great Vehicle Path. In this sutra, which was one of the key sutras brought by the great Iraqi translator Anshikao to China, in this sutra we see a unification of what we call Theravada and Mahayana thought. It's one of the key sutras in that regard. In Buddhism, as it's currently practiced, there are basically 2 broad categories. We don't like categorizing things too much, but there are 2 broad categories, basically Theravada and Mahayana, or sometimes they're called Northern and Southern Buddhism. Theravada being Southern Buddhism, and Mahayana being called Northern Buddhism. Basically because the transmission of Theravada Buddhism went south to countries such as Sri Lanka and Thailand and Burma, and then the Mahayana school predominantly went north to China, to Tibet, to Russia. There was a big community of Mahayana Buddhists in what's now known as the Greater Russia. So a little bit like in Christianity, there are Catholics and Protestants. So it's a little bit like that, different schools of thought. Theravada, which is the form of Buddhism most common in the southern countries, it gave rise to the modern Vipassana movement, which many of us are familiar with. And it developed from one of the 18 schools, the early 18 schools of Buddhism, and that school is called the Tamrasatyas, which means the copper-colored robes. And if you have seen Theravada monks and nuns, you see that they wear a copper-colored, an orange or a golden-colored robe. So that's what they went on. Even back in the day, 2,300 years ago, they were known as the copper-colored robes. The Mahayana school, which is the school of Buddhism that's predominant in the northern countries, developed from the Sarvastivada and the Mahasangika schools, which are also early schools of Buddhism. So some people who haven't, I don't think they've really studied the history of Buddhism that well, call it a schism. Like that there was a schism and Buddhism somehow went north and went south and never the twain shall meet. That's actually a very modern conception of how things are. It's not the reality at all. In fact, for many centuries, Theravadan and Mahayana monastics and lay friends were practicing together, often in the same monasteries or in great centers of learning such as Nalanda University. Myself and Brother Phap visited the ruins of Nalanda University last October when we were in India. So for many centuries, although there were distinct teaching lineages, they coexisted together. And the ideal is slightly different in the Theravadan practice than the Mahayanan practice. The Theravadan practice is about our liberation, our own transformation, and becoming what's called an arhat, or somebody that's realized the way. In Mahayana Buddhism, we have that. And then we also say the ideal is somebody who's a bodhisattva, who dedicates their life to serving others. I want to mention that Vietnam is pretty unique in the history of Buddhism in that the predominant lineages, Buddhist lineages in Vietnam are Mahayana lineages, but that the practice methods, because of historical influences, the practice methods in Vietnam have an emphasis on some of the methods that we would see more often in the Theravadan schools, such as the 4 establishments of mindfulness and anapanasati, things like that, walking meditation, that we don't often see in other Mahayana traditions. So it's a real gem, Vietnamese Buddhism. So basically, the basic teachings of these 2 main lineages of Buddhism are almost identical, with just some emphasis is slightly different. And the methods of practice. Most of that is beyond the scope of this talk. I can hear a big sigh of relief from some of you. Perhaps at some time somebody will offer a class on these things. It probably won't be me. So in general, Theravada Buddhism emphasizes diligently working on our own transformation, our own liberation. And in Mahayana Buddhism, the ideal is not only our own peace and joy, but the deep insight of interconnectedness, of interbeing, or perhaps interdependent co-arising, that our liberation is not separate from the liberation of others. In the 5th realization, we hear this word bodhisattva, which is a big word in Mahayana Buddhism. So bodhisattva is someone who has the insight of interbeing. My happiness can't exist without your happiness. I can't be happy if you're suffering. You know what I mean? You can't be happy if I'm suffering. It's just not possible. There's that deep interconnectedness, that we're deeply connected with those or that which we call others or other, that we have this interrelationship, and that nothing exists, even us, by ourselves alone. And so with that insight, we understand that the greatest work we can do as a practitioner is to be willing to go together as a community, not as an individual. Our teacher has said that insight, or the Buddha, the real Buddha of this time, is a community, not an individual. And looking at the situation of our nation in particular, but in the world, I see that. This is the time for community. This is the time not for the cult of personality or for individuals anymore. But this is a time to reach out and to become one with our communities. So the wish for awakening and to heal the world is called bodhicitta and is described in the text as a wish-fulfilling jewel. Our teacher calls it the mind of love. Isn't that a beautiful expression? Bodhicitta is a very theoretical term, but our teacher says the mind of love. The mind of love towards others and towards the world around, yes, but also towards ourselves. And remember last week, 2 weeks ago, we shared about love or loving kindness having 2 aspects. The cherishing aspect, just like in the Metta Sutta, a mother loves, cherishes her only child, but also what? Protects. Cherishing and protecting. the two aspects of love. So these are the two aspects of bodhicitta. This aspect of cherishing ourselves, cherishing that which we call others, especially if it's something difficult, and then also protecting. Why don't we have a sound of the bell? So bodhicitta is a lovely concept. And then we need to be able to generate this wish in our heart at all times. A couple of winters ago, I think it was Winter Retreat 2017, we gave a series of talks. The Dhamma teachers here gave a series of talks on the different practices to generate this mind of love. Things such as recognizing all beings as our parents in terms of what they give rise to in us. Just as a mother loves and protects her only child. I wish we could all be like children. They're such Zen masters. Recognizing all beings as our mother. What do they give rise to in us? What does our little one who's walking around give rise to in us right now? Recollecting their kindness. The word for gratitude, I was speaking about this with a friend this morning. The word for gratitude in Buddhism is not gratitude, it's just translated as gratitude, but literally the word katanuta, which we translate as gratitude, means knowing what has been done. Knowing what has been done for us. If I sit down and I contemplate the fact, like my robes, everything like that, it comes from the kindness of others. For those of us who are earning a wage and things like that, then we might think, oh, it's all, I earn the money and I pay for it. But do we think about all of the different efforts that have come together to give us those conditions? All the beings that have come together and all the ways that we're supported. For me, it's really a thing that moves me deeply, and I feel always very ashamed because I think I receive so much, and then what am I actually offering back apart from difficulties for others? That's my big offering. But will there be a day that I'm able to offer something that offers relief? Let's see. And then the wish to repay the kindness of others. The wish to, when we see how much we're supported, the wish to be of support as well. Developing loving kindness, developing great compassion, developing wholehearted resolve, and then all of those things together manifest in this mind of love that we call bodhicitta. If we come from a very strictly Mahayana background, we will have heard of the 4 great bodhisattva vows. I thought I'd make it a little easier on the translator today, and I put these in Sino-Vietnamese as well, so give the translator a little break. So these bodhisattva vows are vows that we often take and we often hear in Zen Buddhism, we're a Zen lineage, or in other forms of Mahayana Buddhism. And I wanted to share them today because they're incredibly profound and they remind us of this sense of paradox that we spoke about 2 weeks ago. The first of the great bodhisattva vows are living beings are countless. I will rescue every last one. Even myself. It's often said that for those of us who are raised in the West, the most difficult person to show loving kindness or love or unconditional acceptance for is ourselves. We want to help everybody else. We want to be of service to everybody else. And that's beautiful. But how many of us are completely burned out? How many of us are so angry that we can't even get through the day? Right? Look at the stress, look at the burnout rates. It's incredible. I read an article just 2 days ago about people in the medical profession, and in the past month, 3 out of 4 people in the medical profession have wanted to quit. That's the study that went on. So, yeah, this is someone that we would think of definitely being of service all the time. Who's taking care of the caregivers? Who's taking care of the caregivers? How can we take care of others and take care of ourselves at the same time? That is, for me, I think that's a life's work right there. That simple one thing. Living beings are countless. They're innumerable. It's never going to come to an end. And yet I'm going to rescue every last one. So we sit with that paradox. How on earth is that possible? Afflictions are limitless. There are days that our suffering can seem limitless. Maybe it can be weeks or months or years that our suffering can seem limitless. It can seem like the river Ganges. It's just this raging torrent that we can never, ever finish drinking. You know what I mean? It can never come to an end. Afflictions are limitless. There will never be an end to suffering. And I will transform all. So therefore, another way to put this, my suffering is limitless. Therefore, I will transform it all. Some people have said some of the Zen masters have said that a bodhisattva is one of the most stupid people around. I agree, but remember, if you're caught in the idea of stupidity, we don't know what wisdom is. It's the two sides of the same coin. Afflictions are limitless. I will transform it all. What a heart to say, you know what? This suffering is here and I'm not going to run away. I am not running anywhere. I'm not running physically. I'm not running spiritually. I'm staying with my suffering because that is my path to wisdom. This suffering right here. Your suffering, not somebody else's suffering. It's yours. That's your path of wisdom. That's what we're being invited into here. Step into our life with steadfastness. Dharma doors are infinite. Methods of practice are infinite. I will enter them all. I will learn them all. Now, I've shared many times about this. I wrestled with this for a long time. I remember being young and idealistic and like, yes, I'm going to do it. And then, I don't know about you, but sometimes it's difficult to even mindfully follow an in-breath and an out-breath. How am I going to learn the other 84,999 Dharma doors? I have enough trouble walking through the door of mindfulness of breathing. So, again, how do we transcend that idea of accumulation? Or as some of my friends say, stuffication. Suffocating in stuff. And we can approach our practice from this attitude of accumulation. Okay, if I learn these things, if I get all of this insight, I read this commentary, that teacher is going to give me something, it'll never end. We'll get all of this book knowledge and we don't know where to begin. The Buddha's teaching, Tay's teaching, is begin with a mindful step. Begin with a mindful breath. That mindful step, that mindful breath, that stopping with the sound of the bell is all we need because it contains everything else. Just like in this hall, there's so many different doors and we all walk through different doors. But now it doesn't matter really which door we walk through, right? We're all in the same hall. So choose to walk through the door that presents itself to you. That might be something very simple, but that one choice that we make, for example, in our daily life, every time we hear a sound of the bell, we're going to close our eyes, stop and breathe in and out. Do not look down on somebody who does that. That can change your life. Maybe we're in a moment of despair. That big bottle of pills is on the counter right there. And then our phone rings. We take an in-breath and an out-breath. We realize, you know what? Okay, I can take another in-breath and an out-breath. And then another one. And then another one. That one thing is enough. And that one thing contains everything. Enter all the Dharma doors by entering one fully. The way of the Buddha, the way of awakening, is inconceivable. It's unattainable. It seems so out of reach. Here I am stuck in traffic on the 405. It's like, how does this relate to my life? But I'm going to attain it anyway. One of the most beautiful texts on the development of this mind of love is the Bodhicharyavatara, which I gave a talk on a number of years ago. It was composed in the 8th century. And here are a few lines. It's one of the great texts, one of the great meditation texts that goes through the 6 paramitas. And it contains really the essence of the Madhyamika philosophical school, which we belong to. So here are a few lines about bodhicitta. This text I read a section of every day, and I've been particularly reading some sections of it over the last few days. Like a flash of lightning on a dark and cloudy night, which just for a single instant sheds its brilliant light. Only very rarely does the precious mind of love arise. For all those ailing in the world, again, this is not the world just outside, but in our heart, until every sickness has been healed, may I myself become for them the doctor, the nurse, the medicine itself. For those who are poor and destitute, may I become a treasure, always close within their reach, a varied source of every need. If those who see me entertain a thought of anger or of respect, may those very thoughts themselves bring them the ground of great happiness. May I be a God for those who have none, a guide for those who journey along the way, and for those who wish to cross over, wherever they wish to cross over. May I become their boat, their raft, or their bridge. In short, as long as space endures, as long as there are living beings, may I likewise continue to remain to be of service to all beings. Why don't we have a sound of the bell? So I want to underline the point that I've made a couple of times in this talk, that in order to go further on the path, I've felt really called to embrace this sense of paradox of rather than an either-or situation, it's more of a both-and situation. So we've heard a lot about the different paths, Mahayana path, the Theravadan path, and before we continue on, I think I have to share that I agree with Ajahn Brahm, that it's so easy to get caught up in these different kind of yanas, different kinds of paths or vehicles. And that like Ajahn Brahm, I think it's more important, especially in this day and age, to belong to the Hahayana. Rather than the Mahayana or the Theravada, to belong to the Hahayana. In this realization, we learn about something called the 3 vehicles. And we've spoken about paths such as like outer vehicles, like Mahayana and Theravada, or Mahayana, the great vehicle, or Hinayana, the small vehicle. But there are also inner paths. More importantly, it's an inner path within us, an inner vehicle within us. So we call these the 3 vehicles of Buddhist practice. First of all is the small path, the Hinayana. And this is described as having, this is very interesting because as we go through the different kinds of bodhicitta, somebody who's practicing on the small path is considered to have king-like bodhicitta, a bodhicitta like a king. Basically to aspire to become awakened first in order to then help sentient beings. The small path here, as an inner path, is about my own happiness, my own transformation, my own healing. This is fine. This is great. We need to enter the path where we are. And this kind of designation of small and great, it doesn't mean better or worse. It's just looking at the different kinds of focus, kind of like a micro focus and a macro focus. I often share with my friends in meditation, we need to develop the capacity of a micro attention on one thing, such as our breath, or a macro attention on the whole moment. You can't go through your whole life with a micro attention just on your breath. You wouldn't be able to make a cup of coffee in the morning. Um, and then to just go through our life with a very broad kind of macro attention, we don't have a chance to go deep. We need to have both. So this is not a value judgment. The king-like bodhicitta, to aspire to become a bodhisattva, a Buddha first, in order to help sentient beings. Okay, I need to be completely healed, or I need to have all of this book learning, and then I'll be able to help everybody. So this is the king-like bodhicitta. So notice when we say king-like bodhicitta, we say, good, this is great. And then there's the medium path, the medium scope, which is helping others, compassion. And it's called being a fairy keeper, bodhicitta. The bodhicitta of somebody who's a fairy person. I grew up not a fairy person. I shared about how I used to love, and still do, love the nature beings and stuff in I think it was my first or second talk. This is a ferry, like the boats that cross over. I grew up in a river town, and they didn't have bridges everywhere, so the car would go onto a ferry and we'd cross over, and there was a family who had that ferry. I don't know if Australia is not that old. It's 200 and something years old. So it wasn't as if it was like 30 generations of a family. But it was that family had it at least from their grandparents down to the parents, and then down to the children. So 3 generations of the family had this ferry business. So they used to take us across the river. So here is the medium path, to aspire to become awakened at the same time as other living beings. And then there's the great path. And this is really understanding deeply that there's no such thing as self and others. This is transcending the paradox. It's like my teacher said to me when we had tea together, Brother Phap, if you're really attentive, there's nothing that's not Dharma. There's nothing that's not a teaching. That's the deepest teaching in Mahayana Buddhism. He said that to me when we were having a cup of tea in his hut down here. So this is not something to recite like a mantra. There is no such thing as self and others. There is no such thing as self and others. But this is an insight. To aspire to become a Buddha only after all other beings have done so. And then understanding this paradox that there's no such thing. There's no such thing. Like in the Diamond Sutra, it says, having the wish to rescue everyone, but in truth, understanding that not a single person has been rescued. You know what I mean? To not have this idea of I'm doing something for you. Just like our teacher says, in this great path, this great attitude, it's like when we're nailing a nail into the wall and we hit our thumb, and without any thought, the other hand grabs the thumb and doesn't say, look what I'm doing for you, thumb. You know, like it just naturally, you should be grateful. It just naturally responds without any thought. So this is the attitude here. So notice that great doesn't mean better. Happiness is knowing that we're on the right path for us. And we need to have enough humility. I've definitely been learning humility. We need to have enough humility to see that actually we're all 3 capacities at once. There are certain parts of ourself that we have, for example, a great scope. We're able to receive everything. There are other parts of ourselves that, you know what? No, it's small. So we're not one necessarily. We have all of these capacities. So one of the great discoveries is to look and see in what way do these capacities manifest in our minds, in our heart. It took you a minute. Does anyone know why I called it 51 Shades of Brown? Because there are 51 mental formations, that's right. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. So this is the semi-regular section of these Dhamma talks that I call Why Did You Become a Monk? AKA 51 Shades of Brown. And this is response number 27. This is really the question that we monastics get asked the most. It's almost guaranteed that if there's a question and answer session, we will be asked, why did you become a nun, or why did you become a monk? And I've started to feel that in many cases, people want to, they ask us that question. There are many motivations, but they ask us that question because people, all of us are trying to find a way for the Dhamma to inhabit our lives where we are. And we want to be reminded that, we can do it too. Doesn't mean we all need to be monastics, but yeah, like these monastics are not floating on the sky or something. They're real people. And I think, that's an important question to ask. But there are 1,000 ways to answer the question. And all of the ways of answering it are true in and of themselves, and yet all of them are incomplete. It's so tempting, especially when we're giving an interview or something, or on a question and answer panel, to give a sound bite. A sound bite. I became a monastic because I wanted to rescue all living beings and be continuously available for everybody at all times in all ways. That's true. It's true. But it's a sound bite. You know what I mean? So during this series, I thought, I'll give some vignettes from my life. They're not answers to the question, but they're answers at the same time. And some of those vignettes are conventionally joyful. Some of those are not conventionally joyful. But I'm sharing it because just like the story of Kisha Gotami, the story of somebody else at some level is their story, but it's also our story. So I want to share this with you today. This is, I think, yes. Isn't that a cute photo? It's not me. And yet it's not me either. That's my father. You thought it was me? When I was young, I looked a lot more like my mother, who you'll see in a moment. But now as I get older, I look a lot more like my father. So this is my father when he was 16. So I chose this photo because our teacher was 16 when he became a monk. So I thought, how nice to look back at my father. And apparently I have that smirk like him too. So, but I'm not left-handed. He was actually ambidextrous, but for some reason, I think he was trying to get back at my grandmother, because in that day and age, he was born in 1945. In that day and age, they used to tie their hands behind their back when they were left-handed. So he learned to write with his right hand. And with his school photo, he said, I took it like this, So when his mother would not be able to do anything, So there's a lot behind this behind this photo. So at the age of 22, he was conscripted to go to Vietnam. Australia was and is a party to a treaty called ANZUS, which basically mandates, it's the Australia-New Zealand-US treaty, which basically mandates when the US goes to war, Australia's obligated to go to war as well, bar any unforeseen things. So he was conscripted to go to Vietnam in 1968, 1969, and he served in the Australian Army. So during that time, like so many others, he was drenched in Agent Orange and underwent a lot of trauma during that period. It was the time of the Tet Offensive, so it was a very difficult time. And he was stationed in Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu, which is a little bit south of Saigon, of Ho Chi Minh City. And for some reason, when he was there, he would spend most of his days off going to there's a temple there with a very large Buddha in Vũng Tàu. And he had reams and reams and reams of photos of this Buddha statue. He himself was not a Buddhist, but he said, you know what, in my time in Vietnam, this was the only peaceful moment that I had, was coming on my days off to go to visit that Buddha statue. So I have some photos of that Buddha statue. They're part of my shrine. And it's been a wish for me to actually visit in person this Buddha statue. I've been to Vietnam so many times, and I've been so close, but I've never had the chance to actually be there. I'd like to be there where my father had physically been. So he was a dairy scientist, and he met my mother at a conference out of the blue. That's my mother. Yeah. So I used to look a lot more like my mother. Now I look a lot more like my father. So they fell in love at first sight, and they got married despite both sides of the family disapproving. It was a mixed marriage. My father always told the story of his parents saying, because my mother was a Catholic and he wasn't, he's from another tradition, that my mother would leave him barefoot and penniless with 12 children, which wasn't far from the truth, actually. So mixed marriage was never really comfortable for anybody. But they ended up getting married in our ancestral homeland, the homeland of the Kampenja people, at a place called Kampenjeri. For some reason, my mother was obsessed with Russia. She always wanted to go to Russia. And Australia is so hot that she got married in a fur coat, a white fur coat, and a white, I don't know what to call those Russian hats. She got married in a Russian hat, and then a fur muff over her head, and she said she just had to do it because she wanted to be dressed like Russia, but it was really suffering in the hot weather. It's funny how everything seems normal to us as a child. Everything seems absolutely normal. It doesn't matter what it is because that's all we know. And so as a child, we moved almost constantly. Until I came to Plum Village, I hadn't spent more than a year and a half or 2 years in one place the whole of my life. I'd moved constantly, a little bit like an army brat, but more of a brat, less of the army. So for me, the chance to have been in Deer Park for this period of time has been amazing for me in terms of learning to put down roots and what that actually means. In 1989, my father was 44, and he began to complain of back pain. So when he went to have it checked out, it turned out he actually had an advanced case of, it was a rare form of cancer, and it was not treatable at the time. It might be today, but it wasn't then. It had already kind of spread through his body. So he passed away 6 weeks later, which was 2 days before my 14th birthday. So I was very young. He was 45. He just turned 45. He's the 6th of December, and I'm the 13th. So he passed away on the 11th. So the last thing he said to me was, you have to take care of your mother and your brother now. You're the adult in the family, which I think probably was one of the worst things you could have said to a 13-year-old. So yeah, I really became the caretaker. After that, things at home became quite challenging. I think there are so many things that we can see in hindsight. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I couldn't or I wouldn't see at the time. So it's kind of hard to tell this story because it's hard to tell it from the perspective of where I was at the time because everything's clearer now, but it wasn't then. So I'm kind of in two places at once. So on some level, I felt that something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. After my father's passing away, my mother became quite erratic, and she was periodically physically and emotionally violent. So there were times when she'd be extravagantly generous, and there were times where she'd lay on the couch the whole day and we'd have no food, these kind of things. So I stopped inviting my friends over to the house. Every teenager wants to hang out with their friends and stuff. And I put myself in the position in between my mother and my younger brother because I wanted to protect my younger brother. So I guess I was always trying to prevent the next explosion. And I realized that the only time I was able to breathe and to relax was when I wasn't at home. And I'm really grateful that at that time I went to a Catholic school. Some of you will be surprised to hear that, but that's a story for another time. I went to a Catholic school, and as part of the curriculum, regardless of our spiritual tradition, we had to go to a retreat every year as a class. So my class, my classmates and I, we were together and we went to retreat every year. And that was really the only time that I felt I could breathe, that something wasn't going to happen. So then I also noticed that there was a lot of alcohol in the house, but as both my father and mother were cooks, it didn't really ring any alarm bells, honestly. I was just trying to get through school. So in March 1993, uh, when I was 17, my mother said, "Oh, I'll pick you up from school this afternoon," but she didn't appear, which was not that unusual. So I began to walk home, and a few blocks later, the car pulled up, and my mother picked me up. And so I got in and sat in the car and put on my seatbelt. And in between us was an ice cream container that was covered with a face cloth. And as I put on my seatbelt, I said, "What's this?" And she said, "When we get home, can you take me to the hospital?" I began vomiting blood. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Look in the ice cream container." And so the ice cream container had blood inside. So what had happened was my mother had been drinking so much and not eating that the alcohol had eaten away her esophagus. And the alcohol had begun to cause organ shutdown. So there was basically no way to save her at that time. So she was put into a medically induced coma, and she passed away a few days later on April the 2nd. So which we were actually happy about, because it was April the 1st, April Fool's Day. So I was 17. So after she passed away, we discovered that we were weeks from being evicted from our house, and there were unpaid bills everywhere. After my mother's funeral, the larger family sat together to decide what to do with my younger brother and me. So there was space for only one of us. So my family decided it would be easier for them to take my younger brother, since I was in the final year of school. So we were separated. And then I continued with my final year of school, which is the equivalent of kind of the freshman year of college over here. And I was renting a room and taking care of myself and cooking and cleaning during that time as well. So I think having to take care of so many things myself and always needing to have plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D on a good day so that I would survive means that one of my biggest challenges is putting down roots, of letting go, of letting others and flowing with the moment. And yet this is my path. This is my Dharma. This is what I'm called into. This is, I think, why at some deep level this community chose me. I don't like to say I chose this community, but I think this community chose me. We all have our situations. Each one of us have our situations, the sufferings that have brought us to this moment, and the joys that have brought us to this moment. And when I look back myself, I realize that if I took out even one of those things, I wouldn't be sitting here, which might be a good thing. I don't know. You'll have to answer that question. But these things, the difficult, the hard, the heavy, and the hot parts of our life are not things to be gotten rid of, but rather they're our invitation into wholeness. So when I'm saying that from here, I'm not saying it as somebody who has never had an ounce of suffering in their life. Hopefully, next time, if I'm back here ever giving a talk, I will try to share some joyful things. There are a few more difficult things, but I will try to balance it out. These are our invitations into wholeness. I'll never forget when I was coming back from the hospital after my mother passed away. There was a song on the radio that was playing. It was a song that was very popular. It was #1 in Australia in 1993, and it was a song called Accidentally Kelly Street. And it's such a beautiful song. But it seemed really ironic to me at the time. I was really like, what is this? It was so strange, and just seemed so jarring to listen to this song. It was actually a long time before I could listen to it. But I wanted to share it with you today because not only is it part of my story, that 17-year-old coming back from the hospital to the rest of their life, but also it's a beautiful song about touching the sweetness of life. It's actually very appropriate to a day of mindfulness. So from this perspective, from this person who sits here today, I feel very grateful that this song was playing. I think it was a message from the universe. And I thought I'd play it today. I'm a little worried that people couldn't understand the Australian accent, so I found one with subtitles so that you can read. And please be warned, it's very 90s, just like me. It's very, very 90s. So we'll see how we go. It's a little bit poppy, but I think we'll probably end up having a Deer Park version of this song, so enjoy. Let's see if it works. So this was what was playing. So dear family, thank you so much for being here today. I hope something has been helpful. And thank you for allowing me to be in Deer Park for this time. It's been such an honor to be together with all of you. May each of us be able to walk the path solidly, freely, and happily. Have a wonderful day.